I'm on 2D to 3D, the page that just has that written on it. Maybe we can just
Okay, if you just tell me which page you're on, I've obviously got it here, so I can just read through it. So so you're on, if you go to 37, page 37.
Yep.
So yeah, I thought we'd just take a sort of look back to look forward, just to then sort of talk to the symptomatic issues that we're sort of seeing with the transition from 2D to 3D. So obviously before we talk, we were designing in and delivering in silk, the original format, 1820. We started in tracing paper and up to 1980, and then we moved into CAD in 1960 to 2010 predominantly, which also then brought some SketchUp in, and then we moved to Revit around the beginning of the turn of the 2000. So what we're seeing at the moment is, although software that's come out, the efficiencies that you gain from Revit, we're seeing sort of a drop in attention to detail and care in terms of the technical excellence that then comes out the back end. And there's a significant reliance on the efficiencies that you get out of softwares like Revit that can produce a lot of documents very quickly, but not necessarily to the quality that we would have produced here, but a lot slower. So that for those of you that are on the call that would have had history of drawing and tracing paper, I sort of came in on in CAD, but I was trained up in tracing paper first before going into CAD. And I do remember a lot of those sort of scratching of tracing paper where people were making mistakes in the office and scratching it out and cutting pieces out to then stick it back together. When they were working in this format, they were thinking about every single line they drew before they drew it, understanding every single spec, understanding exactly how stuff come together, because they didn't want to make those mistakes within the documentation because of the abortive work that it would cause and the rework that it would cause. When we moved into CAD, obviously deleting and moving stuff became a lot easier. So mistakes you weren't as potentially worried about beforehand, and you could correct those as you go along. So we started moving a bit quicker and producing more documents quickly. But with CAD, like where you would produce potentially elevations, for those of you who are CAD familiar, you draw your plan, you'd strike your construction lines, you draw your sort of FFL or your levels above it, and you start drawing your elevations. And by the side of that, that's probably where you would start drawing your sections. Every single line was drawn, every single elevation, every single section was drawn. But now where we move into Revit, you draw a wall in a plan and it gives you the elevation. You move a window in an elevation and it updates in a plan. And then you also just generate your sections. And generally what we see is the sections are the worst things that come out of it, because people focus on the plan and the elevations, but they don't really think about the sections as much, as certainly not the quality that comes out. And then also the lines that are shown on drawings are, sometimes they don't mean stuff. Revit can produce lines that maybe you're not aware of, or you don't expect, or you haven't built up your system families, and then you ask people what those lines are, or things go on to drawings to contractors and they become confused. They're not sure what we're trying to communicate, and we're in the business of communicating design, so that's very important. And we're feeling like that's starting to slip away with the efficiencies that we're getting with Revit. Obviously, the efficiencies we all need to benefit from, using BIM, using Revit, using 3D softwares. It's something that we would never suggest going back from, but being mindful of the sort of issues that we get from it is really important. So if you can go to page 38, Esmond.
What's the title of it?
Look back to look forward and impact.
Yep.
So I've sort of overlaid now two lines of kind of curves of what we see is happening from the quality that we kind of see. Obviously, software advancements are massive at the moment. At the turn of the century, it's huge, and the efficiencies that we get out of it are just huge. But with that, the technical care and understanding that people are taking the time to think about what they're drawing, what they're modeling, to then understand how that's then presenting in elevation, in 3D, in section. It's just not quite, it's not the same as it was when we were doing it in 2D, because people were worried about making mistakes. People had to generate all of those drawings from scratch. So people were thinking beforehand, and now we're benefiting from efficiencies early on, but we are losing track of what we're actually drawing in the 3D environment. If you can go to the next page, Usman, which is...
Yep.
Yeah.
What's next?
It's now what's next, yeah. So obviously we've got the further advancements that's coming through now with AI generative design, which is not only just taking away from the technical inputs, but now we're sort of going away from designers actually putting their design inputs, and they're letting computers do that work for them. Again, we would be silly not to benefit from the efficiencies that we could get out of AI and generative design, but all of this is taken away from the skills, the skill sets, that thought process that we would have been putting into drawings, into designs, into delivery, into successful projects that we would have been doing through silk, tracing paper, CAD, and slowly and very quickly in the turn of the century, we've seen a huge drop in sort of the technical excellence that people care about, because it's too easy to produce drawings and you don't have to give it that much thought. A good one would be door schedules, for example. Door schedules, when I used to do them, you'd have to go in a room with two people and one person read out the door number, the other person's looking for it in a plan, they're ticking it off on the plan, reading what it is, going back and forth. It would be a massive job. Well, now you just create a door schedule from a Revit model, and you know what's on the schedule is what's within the model. But then that check-in process isn't really going back and forth. People aren't then thinking that they need to check, well, what's the fire ratings? Are the fire ratings correct? Are the acoustic ratings correct? Have we got door protection? Are vision panels correct in the correct locations? They're just relying that there's a door schedule that is pumped out of a Revit model. You can go down to the next page, Usman.
Yep.
So my mentor, some years back, probably 18 years back, I think, Ian Strakus, for anyone that knows him, he sort of tapped me on the shoulder one day when I was quite a young architectural technologist, and pointed over it, and he said, "What's that line on the drawing?" And I just said, "I'm not sure." It was there when I came to it, and he said to me, "That point is every line on a drawing means something, and if you drew it, or you should know what it is." And that's what we feel, that people don't know what the lines are on drawings these days that come out of Revit, because they didn't necessarily draw it. They modeled it, potentially just in plan, and then it elevated it in 3D, elevated it in elevation. So they didn't necessarily draw that line, but if they thought about what they were drawing before they modeled it, they probably would be clear on what all the lines are on the drawing still, and we wouldn't get silly stuff coming out on drawings from Revit. If we can go down to the next page, Usman.
Yep.
CAD examples. So this is something that's some stuff that I've pulled from my portfolio. This is St Helens Hospital, which is a £350 million PFI project up in Knowsley, up north. All of this was drawn in 2D CAD at the time, and that section that you see there was quite detailed, and I had to take construction lines up that, and all of that was drawn from scratch. I had to get the structural models in and make sure that it was projecting correctly, and then check the structural models in terms of how it then was shown within the sections. And at the bottom left hand corner, I've just done a zoom in of the canopy, and you can see the level of that I went to with those construction lines, because I've even got the angles of the steel of which is going through that canopy. And that was the thought process that I was going to, from thinking from 2D to the 3D, like what am I communicating in a 3D world but through this 2D drawing? Whereas now where we are, we're creating the 3D, and then we're not really thinking about the 2D elements as well as we should be. And then you can see on the right hand side is then further 2D details that were done for the project. You can go down to the next page, Usman.
Yep.
So these are some, I'd say, Revit bad examples, and you can kind of see the difference of what I showed previously from the CAD and what I'm showing now in this view. So on the left hand side, you can see this is a section for a roof, and you've got at the top there 2 modeling items which is just overlapping, and there's no parapet concrete bunds to be able to keep the roofing in, and to be able to create a better connection between those 2 elements. In the top middle, you can just see there's a roof that's just not finished. That would never have ended up like that if it was done in CAD. But this is because they're looking at it in 3D and it looks okay in 3D. But when you look at it in 2D sections, it doesn't look as strong. It looks pretty poor and it doesn't look coordinated. Whereas when you're drawing 2D elements and you're placing those 2D elements, you're forced to think about the coordination, you're forced to think about the technical solutions, which then go back and inform the 3D model. And what we're seeing a lot of people come through and say to us is that, well, we don't put the 2D level of information now because what's the point? It's a waste of time. You know, the model does it for you. We just cut the sections through the model and just add annotation to it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work, and you'll never get it technically. You'll never get a technically solid package. You might get it roughly close, but you'll never get it to the quality that we used to, and you'll never get it absolutely spot on. You know, by just drawing the bricks, for example, in a section that has bricks, and just doing your coursing and checking your coursing, and when you get to masonry supports, making sure that you've planned in the movement joint, which will probably be 20 mil rather than 10 mil if you don't have a pistol brick. Those sort of things, and layering that up, starting from the bottom, working your way up. Don't start from the top, working your way down. All those rules, they're lost and they're not really going into a Revit model. And you can see at the bottom middle there, we've got a wall, which has obviously been drawn in plan on the left there, that is sat on a shaft opening, and someone else probably on the team has drawn a roof finish which goes over shaft openings. Again, it's just not coordinated. Whereas if it's thought about more so, you wouldn't sort of see those drawings coming through like that. And then all of those small ones on the bottom right there are just full of coordination issues. That yes, that balustrade and those louvers would probably look where you want them to be in 3D. They probably look where you want them to be in plan. But when you come to the section, if you were casting your construction lines up to then place those elements in, you would straight away see that those louvers clash with the slab edge, that balustrade is not connected to the slab edge or not connected to a structural element, that we've got steel that sits through elements. So all of that sort of stuff would be seen and would be caught in 2D straight away, and you wouldn't even draw it wrong from the start. But because we're just churning it out of Revit, it's they're not going back to it and doing the overlay of 2D detail. So if you can go to the next page, Usman.
Yep.
This is what BSBG produce in terms of detail sections, and you might just want to zoom into a couple of and just go down these sections, Usman. Just maybe start on the top left of the left one and just sort of go down, and you can see in these sections that we've got the brick coursing, we've got the rain screen supports, we've got the pressings in here which pop out the features. We've got the fire stops at the slab edges. We generally do this at this level of detail at the detail sections, the strip sections. And what a lot of people say to us is, well, why would you do it to that level of detail on a 1 to 50 section? It's too much. It's like, yeah, but we then connect that to the 1 to 5 details. So when we're modeling our facades, when we're modeling modeling that in the background, we're also drawing the 2D details so that we know that every single part of that facade is coordinated, every single part of that facade it works technically. And then only then do we pull out the technical details and the work's done. All you then really need to do is add the additional layers of membranes and the like to those 1 to 5 details, which then you can see on the right of this page, which is a balcony detail which has been pulled out from that. And that's the terms of the process that we go through. So we are we do combine the 2D process with the 3D process, but as a business, we still see it going wrong, and we still see that we have to catch it when it goes wrong, because people start off with this mass production of documents from a 3D model, and they don't then take the time to go back and do this overlay of 2D information to make sure that 3D information works, and we don't have any technical issues and we don't have any coordination issues. You can go down to the next page, Usman.
Yep, the quote.
Yeah. So like any software, Revit is a tool that helps us achieve the outputs. It is not a tool that changes the output requirements. And I think that's what's happening at the moment in the industry. We're trying to change the output requirements, but a contractor still needs documents in a certain way to build from. Cost consultants still need documents in a certain way to price from. And the art of architecture and the art of architectural delivery, architectural technology hasn't changed. We should be still issuing the same technical excellent documents to support our clients and to make sure that projects are delivered successfully without any issues, and are technically sound. It can obviously complement the output requirements. Obviously, we're now able to quickly put 3Ds on our sheets just to show you in even more detail of what we're trying to communicate, which is that added benefits. But it shouldn't be resulting in substandard technical documentation. You can go to the next page, Usman.
Yeah, we're on process.
Yeah, so how has the process changed? So this is a slightly different sort of topic to what we just talked about. Obviously, we're talking about maybe the outputs, but I just want to go into the process. So if we can go to the next page, Usman, which is process Revit over CAD.
Yep.
Yeah. So I see it as the difference. CAD worked in layers, Revit works in building blocks. You have to build a Revit model up, whereas in CAD, you had to layer it. You had your XREFs, they came through and you draw the different layers, and you'd never put everything in CAD in one drawing, because that would be so much risk, so much abortive work, and even trying to get the team into that one drawing to be able to work together collaboratively. So you had to separate it into your layers, which is like tracing paper. So in the way that we used to work in CAD is like the way that we used to work in tracing paper. But the big shift since we went to Revit, it does not work like tracing paper. It does not work like CAD. It works like building blocks, like a Jenga. And then if you start pulling the wrong blocks away at the wrong time, then you can cause yourself massive problems on a project. It's quite easy to slip a bit of tracing paper out and slip a bit of tracing paper back in, to rectify a mistake in CAD. Very difficult to do that in building blocks in Jenga, especially if you're trying to tackle that bottom lot, which is your sort of BEP, your model split, your model locations and orientations, and your levels, and so on. So if we can go to the next page, Usman. So have you gone to the next page, Usman? Process Revit and CAD still, yeah. So there is there's an industry standard efforts curve, which you can see on the middle right there, bottom right, below those, and we've sort of compared that to the 2D traditional efforts curve. So we've got the stages in there. Some of you may be familiar with schematic design. Some of you may be familiar with stage 3 instead. With Revit, the effort needs to come in quite early on, because you want to benefit from the efficiencies that you'll get at a later point. Whereas and that's the red line that you can see there. With CAD, you'd hold off on doing too much detail until the very end, until there's no risk of change. The layouts are locked down, and then you just put a team on just to smash out all of the detailed documentation for that project. It changes the ability to control cost, which is the green line, and it changes the BIM efficient output of what you can efficiently output. So really what you want to be doing at the beginning of stage 3, you want to be hitting it hard, getting all of your efficiencies into the Revit models. And then through stage 4, you want to be riding that wave of that hard work that you've created, and you just want to be pumping out that information. And what you need at the front end is strong, technically minded people to understand in stage 3 schematic design what the contractor's going to need as an output, what the cost consultant's going to need as an output, what the client's going to need, because you need to build that into your models at the very start. So you need that foresight, looking ahead, to be able to know what comes out. Where we see, if you don't have that, and if you don't have team members that are providing that foresight, what you'll see is that red line will probably go up at the beginning of schematic design, and it will stay up all the way through to the end of construction documentation, tender docs, end of stage 4, probably the end of stage 5. Your efforts will just be at the top all the way through. So it's really important to get the right people in at the start, to ensure that you're de-risking it at a later date, and you can benefit from the benefits of BIM. If you can go to the next page, this one. So just talking about some of the opportunities, go to the next page. Obviously, coordination being a key opportunity. I'm sure everyone is aware of like Naviswork and Clash Detection, Celebre, where we're seeing sort of, again, the reliance on software is a lot of people that are coming through at the moment are thinking that the software will give you the answers. The software will do the work for you. You just run the clash detection. We see a lot of issues and a lot of fall down on that, where people are just leaving it within the software, and they're not then reviewing it efficiently, or not reviewing it as they should or as they would have done when we were working in a more 2D method. Now, the software is actually saving us a lot of time compared to the 2D method, but we still need to check it. We still need to go through the same processes that we would have gone in 2D, but doing that in 3D, and then we'll get the full value out of BIM coordination, BIM 3D coordination, to then reduce issues that go out onto site and give assurance to the client and assurance to us that the design is going to be as we expect it to be. If you go to the next slide, Usman.
Yeah.
So that's just touching on what I've just said. Then obviously significant opportunities. Yeah, the software will provide the responses, but we need to assess and respond accordingly. And there is a misconception that clash detection is all we need to do, and you've just got the Revit button and you've got the Navis button that will just do the jobs for you. If we can go to the next page, Usman.
Yep.
I'll just rattle through these quite quickly. So we've been looking at opportunities recently in the last few years to 2D detailing, and where we're seeing maybe a downfall, and this is probably a downfall when we were doing 2D detailing previously, though the skill set was probably stronger in thinking about it. It comes down to the sequencing. So a 2D detail can look great, can look sound, can look like somebody knows what they're doing. However, if it can't be sequenced properly, then when it goes to site, the contractor will then say it can't be sequenced properly, and then they will change your detail during the construction stage, which then will take you away from the design intent. And straight away, we haven't protected the design intent. We haven't given assurance to the client that they're going to get what we've promised within these technical details. And then you're forced, because you're at that stage, you're forced to accept something that maybe you weren't looking for at the start. So if you go down to the next page, Usman.
Yeah.
What we're doing on some projects, we are actually breaking down the elements within Revit, and we're sequencing them to be able to see how they come together in a 3D way. So all of these little visuals that you can see here have all been modeled in Revit, and maybe, Usman, you can just zoom in and just move along a couple of them so they can see them in a bit larger.
Yeah.
And then if we go down to the next page, that then shows you it again a bit larger. So you can see how we sort of have pulled the elements out to show step by step how that then comes together as a detail. And you can see the level of detail that we've gone to as a company, showing the wall ties, the frogs of the bricks, the and the bolts. And not to say that you should be doing this on every project, but where you get sort of some complicated details or areas of concern, that's what we're trying to get our teams to think like now, our technical teams, to start thinking about how does it come together in a 3D way, and then that will inform your 2D details. And then we've proved that it works. And then if you go to the next page, what we've done on some of our projects, like the Mount Anvil projects, we provided GIFs that can be loaded onto mobile phones, sent around to the team, the contractors, and then the contractors can see the intent of how we plan for that to get built whilst they're on site. Go down to the next page, Usman.
Yeah.
This just talks to some of the BIM uses that we use in BSBG, and it's really sort of coming to the end of the presentation now, but I'll just talk you through some of the uses. So if you can just zoom in slightly, Usman, so where you've got S1 above that, we obviously got point cloud surveys, which we use recap, and we bring into Revit models, and we remodel by snapping to the points. Generally don't do any masses or meshes because it makes the models very large. We do BIM execution plans, which are below that. We drive the BIM execution plans normally ourselves. We produce them, and we come up with project-specific solutions to demonstrate how we're going to achieve success in those projects. Above that, you can see the sort of split of models. We try and get all disciplines to be working in Revit below the lead consultancy umbrella. If you go below that line, come down from S4, we have the digital engineering meetings. Every project has a digital engineering meeting. We start off by reviewing from a 3D point of view, and then we move into the 2D clash detection, the 3D clash detection, which is automated. You can't just do 3D clash detection. You have to do the manual reviews as well. Moving along, you can see the sort of complex geometry that you can see there with a sphere that was modeled by BSBG for the island project. That's the entertainment zone in the center. We've talked about the details above that and the 4D BIM detailing. We do 3D printing within the office. We've helped out with digital twins for projects like ICD Brookfield Place. And we obviously have a site presence, and we're using the BIM models and Navisworks and BIM 360 ACC on projects. If you go down to the next slide, Usman, and this is last two slides now.
Yep, it says architecture.
Yeah, and then if you go to the next slide. So another challenge that we're seeing at the moment is we are seeing a lot of junior architectural technologists coming out of university, and they're really keen to get into the lead role of projects. But in terms of what we see as a journey to get you to that point, this is sort of mapped out on this timeline here. So we would expect sort of the basics of spatial planning to be done. Then we would expect package production to understand what's required within packages. Detailing, our architectural technologists, we expect them to be able to detail. Specification writing, and when you get to that specification writing, then you kind of think that you've probably been all over the packages. We'd hope that you have, and you kind of understand what's required, and then you turn into a package lead. Then we see them going into digital engineering lead and then that's really the coordination aspect, is controlling coordination. We'd expect to see some site experience, and by that point we would see them going into like a delivery lead, then project lead, then multiple project lead, technical managers, operations managers, office managers, etc. So just finishing on that note, I'm going to the last slide of the presentation. BSBG are hiring at the moment, so if there are any sort of strong candidates out there that would like any opportunities with us, as I mentioned, architectural technologist we're very keen on, and we've got close relationships with CIAT for that reason. We come from executive delivery. People come to us for our executive delivery and our technical excellence, and we are currently looking, and we're growing a lot at the moment on some huge projects, exciting projects, challenging projects, and we've got a very healthy pipeline for the next few years. Dubai, you can see there, we've got 20 to 21 positions. London, we've got 2 positions. In total, we've got 23 positions. For architectural technologists, we can see them being able to go into all of those roles. So project director, who would be over multiple projects. That isn't necessarily a company director, that is somebody directing projects, and could be up to 4 projects they'd be over. Leads typically spread over 3 projects. Leading depends on the complexity of projects. Seniors specifically on a project, and working on the technical inputs and the coordination of projects. Intermediates would be managing the packages, package managers. Juniors generally working on packages. And then we've got the interior design aspect. So we are also really keen to find architectural technologists or technical architects or technically minded interior designers that can deliver and detail into interior spaces, including joinery and the like. But again, we see those as really good opportunities for architectural technologists or technical architects that have that experience and that are able to provide that. So if you're interested, please don't hesitate to contact that email address at the bottom there, which is our HR department. Please mention my name, Mark Vaughan, in the email to let them know that that's where that's where it's sort of come from, and then that will also be flagged to myself, who oversees a lot of the recruitment. And yeah, please let us know if you're interested, and that's it for the presentation. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that. I'll come back in and turn my camera back on. So apologies, everyone. I know there was a slight technical issue, which has caused a slight delay on the CPD, so I do apologize for that. Hopefully, we've managed to smooth that somewhat with stepping in and presenting it via my side. We do have a few questions in, and I know obviously we're quite quickly approaching 2 o'clock. So if anyone does have any questions, and please do feel free to ask. We were asked a couple of things just to cover some housekeeping. CPD certificates will not be issued. These slides will be shared to all registered attendees, and the event will then be uploaded to YouTube in due course via the CIAT official YouTube channel. So we have a question in from I think a couple of questions actually, which are very similar in their vein. Umair and Jonathan have asked similar-ish questions. In your opinion, why nowadays professionals and practices are slightly reluctant in transitioning from 2D to 3D? Do you feel as though it might be they're in their comfort zone, a cost and time program associated to it? What's your feeling in regard to that?
I think it's different for different practices. I think it's definitely in their comfort zone in a lot of instances. I also think that then it's a scale of practice and a scale of projects that they're working on. Obviously, it's quite an expensive software. Is it worth it in all projects? Is it worth it on a house or a house extension? I think it is. But then you've probably got to weigh up the odds, and you've probably got a lot of sort of standard details on those type of projects as well, and it could become more effective to work in 2D. But when you get to larger projects and larger companies, it doesn't make sense to be working in 2D. They have to really be considering to get the efficiencies and to get the value out of BIM, and to start benefiting like all architects benefit from. And anyone working on a large scale project should be working in Revit and working in 3D or ArchiCAD, but I would suggest Revit is the leader, and then also trying to collaborate with other consultants and getting them on board in Revit as well. If a client, and some of this is as well led by the clients, they don't understand, and it's up to us really to inform them and educate them on the benefits of using 3D. And with using 3D, a lot of the practices do charge more, which is only fair because the clients are getting more, and they're getting a better product, they're getting a better outcome. But at the same time, they don't understand what they're getting, and why they're having to pay more, so they would just prefer to do it in 2D. But you know, it guarantees success in a lot of instances. It protects the client, it gives assurance, cost assurance, it gives time assurance. There's so many benefits that it's probably nervous about sort of moving away from what they know scale of projects, scale of practice, and the cost associated with it. You've got to weigh up the odds if you're just working on small projects. And then educating what the benefits are and how you're going to sort of reap those benefits as a company and how the clients will reap those benefits.
Probably got time for another two questions. So similar to what you mentioned about education, we've got a question in from Jonathan, where he's said that he's seeing graduates and early career professionals having a very little grasp or entry-level grasp in the technical side of things, and feeling as though, as you've mentioned within your presentation, that they feel as though the 3D packages such as Revit can do everything for you. What's your sort of key takeaways from how you would feedback that back to everyone, and how they can potentially go away and elevate their learning? I mean, from a small perspective from myself, is that one thing that you have to bear in mind is architecture is a lifelong career, and you're constantly renewing yourself and learning and developing further. But I'll pass it back to you, Mark.
Well, I think so. We've identified part of the recruitment process, certain universities that are heavily focused on, and we've looked at the curriculum and we've spoken to people that have gone to them, and they really just talk to Revit, Navisworks, and they don't do any technical detail, and they don't do any of the specification stuff, any of the surveying stuff that we used to do in our course, and they kind of. The problem with that is they're moving the architectural technologists back into a bracket where they're architectural technicians. They're just technicians of using a software. Which is blurring the lines. Architectural technologists are not excellent at software. They're excellent at knowing how buildings come together, at knowing building science, and ensuring that the design intent will get through to the construction. That's what architectural technology is about, not about softwares. So there's a lot of universities, even that I've met with, that are falling into the same trap, and it's a difficult one really, because recruitment companies are also looking for people that can use Revit, like we do it. We need everyone using Revit that we employ. But we can't have someone who just can use Revit. We need people that are technically minded that can use Revit. I've suggested to multiple universities that scrap Revit until the last few weeks. Just take them back to tracing paper, drawing boards, CAD, and do it the old-fashioned way, and they will learn technically what they need to learn. And then Revit is a tool. Revit is a tool which is just a course at the end, and you can do that in a couple of months, in a month. This shouldn't be part of the curriculum. That's my take on it.
Great, thank you for that. You've got a couple of others which have, again, I'll try and amalgamate into a single question. In essence, we've had questions in from Stephen and Nick, which talk about how amazing a tool like Revit is, but also as well, in many instances, it actually doesn't save time, it actually takes more time. But the added value is the big thing to take away. Again, you've mentioned it in your talk, but if you can maybe sort of embellish further, that'd be great.
Yeah, I agree with that. There are certain things, because you can get that extra, you sort of give that extra. But I think overall, it balances out to save time, providing you order yourself in the correct way, you approach it in the correct way. So as I mentioned, the effort needs to come first, then you sort of ride the wave afterwards. So although some things may take more time, you'll reap the benefits at the back end, which are great. I think the problem in the industry at the moment, and what some people don't understand, is seniors of projects. And again, we look for this with our sort of project leads and our project directors. They will commit to changes. And this was that Jenga block, really. They'll commit to changes which they don't understand, because they probably come from the CAD world. So they don't understand the impact of that change and the time that it would take to make that change. And that's then that efforts curve and the ability to control change and cost. And then you've got to understand when it's time to say this is a variation, because this is a massive impact on rebuilding those blocks of that model. But then the other problem that we've got, and a bit of a pinch point, is obviously Revit has brought such efficiencies in. Our clients all want projects earlier, rather than allowing you the same time to deliver those projects as what we had with CAD. They want it quicker. So then those opportunities that you may have had to be able to make sure it was right in a controlled manner with your headspace where it needed to be, you're now crunching it down further. So those efficiencies and the coordination of what you would want, the pressure is on because the clients know that you can do things quicker and produce documents quicker. So I think in answer to the question, I think it's sequencing of when you do things. Yes, definitely some things take longer. Some things take longer at the beginning, but once you take that time, you reap the benefits at the end. Things take longer at the end if they're asked to be changed that should have been asked to be changed at the beginning because it's the wrong timing.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Mark. Again, I would like to apologize for the technical issues which caused a delay on the event today. But thank you very much for that, Mark. It was a great insight into what can be produced and the care and attention that's required to make sure that a project can proceed in a very considered manner and actually come to completion and handover with everyone in complete alignment all the way through. So thank you for that. Just to highlight our final event, so this was our penultimate event for the year. Our final event for the year is from Moy Materials Blue and Green Roofs. So that will be in December and should be advertised via the Eventbrite page already. Please do sign up for that, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Again, thank you for everyone's support in the CPD in 43 series. If you do have any suggestions for our 2025 schedule, please do let us know. We only have a few vacant positions left for the entire year, so it's booking up quite quickly, but please do let us know and we'll try and get those into that schedule. Have a great rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you in December. Thank you again, Mark. Very much appreciated, and I hope you have a great evening.